There we go. Okay, great. I've got my notes over here on a separate thing, so excuse me if I look away a little bit to read this. It's so lovely to see you all today, and I've been really enjoying some of the presentations. I caught quite a few this morning before I had another meeting. So as Karen introduced me, I'm Rosemary James-Beith, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Glasgow. I'm based within the Centre for Cultural Policy Research, which is a research centre that's part of the College of Arts, and I'm in the second year of my PhD. Can everybody see that? Okay, I realise it kind of goes across the views okay a little bit, but I wanted to share some details of activity I undertook during my first year between January and June this year. And this activity really helped me in the process of the PhD. It helped me reframe my research questions, update my research proposal, develop my methods and sources chapter, apply for ethical approval, which a number of you will have to do, and had it approved first time, which I've been told is not common. A lot of people have amendments to make. But most of all, it really built my confidence and capacity to undertake the research that I was proposing. The next slide here. So to start, I wanted to give you a bit of background and context on the PhD research project that my Research Support Award grant relates to. My PhD developed from my master's dissertation project, which I undertook in 2019 to 2020. During my master's in creative industries and cultural policy at the Centre for Cultural Policy Research, I undertook a qualitative research project into a recently launched manifesto for craft and making in Scotland. And I did that through undertaking interviews with 14 people involved in the development of the manifesto, and reviewed news reports, social media content, website content, lots of policy documents. And this was completed in 2020, and it was all done remotely, digitally, as a result of the COVID lockdowns. But that experience, which came off the back of over 10 years of working in the cultural sector in Scotland, really led me to develop an interest in the way that the craft sector in Scotland collaborates with itself, what values and beliefs drive that collaboration, and what they collectively hope to achieve, and how cultural policy, that is the government action or inaction related to culture, has shaped this over time. And that is a definition of cultural policy provided by Bell and Oakley. So the PhD proposal that I was funded to do is up on screen, and I wanted to kind of share how it looked, because I'm going to show how it looks after the Research Support Award at the end of this presentation. But this broad interest led me to develop this research proposal, a process many of you will have just gone through. And this is what the original PhD title and research questions looked like. So I had a title that was about collaborative behaviours, about survival skills in post-capitalist futures, and I had 5 research questions, and it was very, very broad. So I have over a decade of work experience in the cultural sector. I'm fortunate to have lots of contacts. I can draw on good networks and a really good understanding of how to run projects and project evaluations. I would consider myself an expert in these things, but I'm not an expert academic. And this was a huge learning curve for me to come into academia at this point in my life. I've not undertaken many rigorous, large-scale qualitative research projects that this was proposing. The other thing is that I was really keen to use ethnography, but I've never done ethnography before. I mean, I've drawn on methods like participant observation, but I've never done a large-scale ethnographic project of the kind that I was proposing. So initially, I was looking for up to 12 participating organisations. I was looking at a huge range of different collaborative styles to look at, including shared workspaces and selling platforms of makers, as well as digging into archival materials across Scotland's collecting institutions and museums, archives and libraries. So on this, one of the first meetings I had with my supervisors, my very supportive and very experienced supervisors, said to me early on, this is too broad. I want you to go away and think about what project you actually want to do and what could you do in the next few months to get you closer to understanding what you want to do. So they understood that it was too broad, it was too scattergun in terms of the focus for the fieldwork. They drew my attention to the School of Culture and Creative Arts Research Support Grants, which provide seed funding for both PGR students and staff. They suggested early on that I might apply to one of these funds in order to scope out my fieldwork and archival access, provide a kind of R&D process for the project. And so the process of applying for a research support grant and the impact it then had on my PhD over the last year is what I want to share with you today. So both the College of Arts and the School of Culture and Creative Arts have 4 deadlines a year to their respective research support funding. I don't know how it works in the other colleges, so this will be very specific to my experience of applying for the School of Culture and Creative Arts Award, but there are equivalents in other parts of the university, and your supervisors or your research lead, your college, your grad school will be able to give you information. So the application process itself is fairly simple. It includes spaces to detail reasons for applying, where you describe the research activity and its relationship to your own work, the breakdown of funding applied for. You need to develop an itemized budget, the details of outcomes you want to achieve, such as contributing to a specific chapter of your thesis or contributing to a publication or data collection, the dates of the activity. And there's quite specific guidelines around what periods each fund will support. Any other funding sources, so some of you will have different scholarship awards or external funders or partners, they might contribute, and you need a statement of support from your supervisor, which needs to be completed before you submit. The awards are really made very quickly, unlike some other industry grants that can take months. They have a turnaround of between 4 and 6 weeks, and they're designed to support travel and accommodation costs associated with undertaking research activity, as well as costs involved in attending events and conferences that you might be presenting at, such as ticket fees. So each fund has different criteria about what can and can't be supported and different wording on the application form. Read it carefully, but the process is fairly straightforward and is quite similar between the different applications I've seen. And the value of the awards, it's anything between about £200 to about £400 for the College of Arts one, which are slightly higher, and you can apply multiple times, up to 4 times a year. So you could potentially be bringing in up to £1,600 a year into your project. So what were the benefits of completing it? Why was it beneficial for my project? So the process of applying was really helpful because it made you stop and think about the project holistically. And the act of completing the application form itself, even if the funding hadn't been awarded, was beneficial because it forced me to consider how I would communicate my project very simply and its aims to someone who knew nothing about it at all. So the award assessor sits somewhere remotely, they're not involved in your project, and that's a really helpful thing to think about public engagement. And you have a very tight word count, so it gets you thinking about writing abstracts, writing short summaries. It forced me to think carefully about what I hope to achieve with each of the activities I was requesting support for, and it forced me to prioritise because of the maximum grant allowed. I had to undertake research, very practical research, to develop my proposal, looking at dates, contacts, events, archives I could access, exhibitions I could attend, the locations, things like train travel costs. You know, all of that was very basic research, but it drew on certain skills, and it's useful as you go forward in your academic career. And it made me produce a detailed itemized budget and calendar of activity that helped plan my time, because coming into the PhD, you sometimes can feel like you've got so much time and so many different options. This made me focus and write a plan of activity that would help kind of scaffold my, my broader PhD activity alongside it. And even if I hadn't been successful, I would have used that planning to guide the PhD work during January to June this year. So I would suggest that all of you could learn something about your research and yourselves as researchers by completing an application, even if it's not successful. But apparently the applications have a quite high success rate because few first and second year PGRs actually apply to them. So I would recommend you have a look at them. So what did I actually do So I was successful and I was awarded £145, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually allowed me to do a lot of different things. So first thing I did was visit the National Museums of Scotland's Research Library and their Scottish Life Archive in Edinburgh in the Chamber Street Museum. I could access physical documents, newspaper clippings, publications, lots of material objects related to Scotland's crafts that were not accessible digitally. And it allowed me to survey and evaluate the available materials before committing to use them in my research. And it allowed me to test out the process of requesting archival materials and documenting the process and my thoughts and findings during those visits, because archival research is not something I'd done before this PhD. The second thing I did was I visited Fife Contemporaries Resolve exhibition at Kirkcaldy Galleries in Fife. This visit enabled me to see a range of craft makers and designers' creative responses to environmental crisis, exploring issues of sustainability and circular economy principles. This visit enabled me to trial photographic documentation. These are photos I took during that trip, as well as writing field notes and getting into the habit of writing down my findings in the space, and develop my understanding of the language that the craft sector in Scotland were using in relation to sustainability, which had become an increasing priority over the last decade. Next, I went to the Scottish Potters Association exhibition, which was held in the Barney Centre in West Kilbride, which is known as the Craft Town Scotland. And that was in early May for the opening. I had the opportunity to see a single association's work set out in an exhibition, understand a bit more about the way people from across Scotland were being brought together in curated exhibition spaces, and it provided me the opportunity to begin the process of negotiating access to that organisation for ethnographic observation, and very informally discuss what might or might not be feasible in terms of access. And the email and telephone exchanges that happened leading up to and after the visit reminded me of that labour and time and effort and emotional labour that goes into setting up fieldwork, how time consuming it actually is, and how much time I might need to build into my methods timetable for the data collection period. It also reminded me of the blurring of personal and professional boundaries that's come up in a few of the talks, both from my own self, offering up a bit about who I am and what I'm interested in personally, and a bit about, you know, my family life and where I live and so on. Not street name, obviously, but just a bit about who I am to give that personal connection with the chair of the organisation that I was speaking to, but also what they brought about their personal life and their relationships into that space, and reminding myself that I had to walk a very fine line in terms of the ethics of capturing that, but also not ensuring the privacy of the participants in that space. The next one was a revisit to National Museums of Scotland to access some of the archival materials I'd requested first time round, and a visit to Creative Cred, which was an exhibition hosted by I've got the details here, by Creative Informatics at InSpace at the University of Edinburgh, which is another research unit related to a lot of digital innovation around cultural products. And this, being at that opening, was particularly useful because it allowed me to practice my fieldwork approaches, field note-taking in a very busy live event with over 100 attendees and lots of different participants, as well as meet and discuss my project with a whole range of people, including someone who then subsequently became another key person to negotiate access for another organisation. It also raised my confidence and the credibility that I had in that space, knowing who was who in the sector that I was researching. This is a picture from my visit to Glasgow Women's Library, an archive in Glasgow's East End. It houses a really incredible collection of quite diverse materials relating to women's history, women's labour organisation, activism. There were some materials in their digital archive that connected with craft, particularly one related to a 1970s Scottish Council of Industrial Design that had been involved in supporting craft businesses in Scotland at that time. And I dug into vast boxes related to that note in the archive catalogue, only to find that the materials were not actually relevant to my research. And that was a real learning curve, steep learning curve, about the amount of time and preparation it takes to use archival materials and to access them, but also the high rates of mistakes or kind of false starts or cul-de-sacs that you end up in during that process as well, that you have to build that time in to the project and not always expect to find things that are useful. And the final activity was a visit to Potfest, which is an annual festival of pottery that happens at Scone Palace in Perth, and then on to Dunkeld Makers Collective and the Burnham Institute in Dunkeld and Burnham in Perthshire. And this is actually a picture of my son, who I brought along to the event and who tried pottery for the first time, which was a very lovely experience, but it also, again, allowed me to test out the experience of taking field notes, talking with people, experiencing the selling activity and the workshops as a lay person, but also keeping that researcher head on. And it allowed me to consider what my introduction was. How did I present myself in these spaces? Because I want to be really overt and open and honest that I am researching these spaces, but also have to ensure that I don't disrupt the activity that's happening by kind of wandering in as a researcher to change what's happening. So it was a real steep learning curve. All of these experiences gave me so much to think about. And so the impact on my own PhD activity. So following the Research Support Award activity, I reframed my research questions. I refocused and updated my research proposal, and I'll show you that on the next slide, how it shifted things. I developed my methods and sources chapter. It helped me select 4 fieldwork sites. I made contact with gatekeepers for each of them. I negotiated access in a very early stage. I developed a rough fieldwork timetable, understanding what the flow across the year of activity was for those organisations and how they presented that. I built an understanding of the types of data and the volume of data that I would need to deal with. And I explicitly built in more rest periods and downtime than I originally considered to ensure time for reflection, writing, synthesizing findings, and also ensuring I didn't burn out because of the amount of energy expended all of this would take. I applied for ethical approval on the back of that. The experience really helped me understand and communicate the ethical considerations that I would find in the field. The investigating that I am currently investigating are very known to each other, and so the meaningful anonymity that's required in the ethics application is very hard. So I had to show that I had taken extra steps to ensure the anonymity of my participants, as well as thinking about how those sensitive topics that aren't the focus of my research but come up naturally in conversation, like the health or the disability status of participants, their family relationship status, their sexuality, all of these things can come up quite organically in conversation and need to be treated sensitively because they are protective characteristics as well. The other thing was that it really informed my understanding of my own health and well-being and my safety, and I developed a personal risk assessment for fieldwork that took into account ensuring that somebody knew where I was at all times, that I had contact information, that I was never alone one-on-one with participants and so on. And this experience really helped to develop my understanding of what kind of risks I would face in the field. But the most important thing, I think, was that it built my confidence and my capacity to undertake the research. It gave me time to try out in a very risk-free environment my own presentation of who I was in the field as a researcher, as opposed to a cultural worker or arts manager, and allow that shift to take place. So this is how my PhD proposal looks now. And I won't read it all out, but I just want to draw your attention to I focused down not on collaboration in total in the craft sector, but on self-organization of makers. And I focused down on 4 organizations rather than looking at a huge number. And so the mapping as a total became less important, and the deep understanding of 4 organizations became more important. I also narrowed down the research questions from 5 to 4 and made it a much more logical grouping of 4 questions, each relating to a specific way that I imagine presenting it in the findings chapters of the thesis as well. So from all of that, I've got some advice that I think will be useful for you to think about as you go forward. And a lot of these things actually have come up in the previous presentations. So document the little things, document what you're doing, even when it doesn't feel like you're doing the PhD research. Keep an informal research diary. I started doing that early on. It's been really useful. It allows you to jot down those random thoughts, milestones, ideas that you have in the middle of the night, and notes to yourself that aren't going to appear in a written document to your supervisors, but help keep you on track of where your head's at. You can pilot or test out little, in small ways, things that you're unsure about. If you've got a method that you want to use but you're not sure about it, find a way to do a mini study or a pilot, and the support grants, the research support grants, can be a really good way of framing that. Talk to people about your project. You can be quite isolated as a PhD student, and you can have your head down in the books for long periods. So reaching out to people in your field or in your sector can be very productive. People are very responsive and open often to having a short chat over a coffee, your peers too, and it really helps you talk out loud about your project and also hear their feedback and questions. The 4th thing is to celebrate the successes, the milestones. You have to keep your eye on this big picture of a completed thesis, and it can feel miles away. So giving yourself intermediate steps and celebrating them when you achieve them is a really good way to stay motivated. And the final thing is, don't be scared of change. So you might be quite protective of your PhD proposal and your ideas at the start of this journey. You've had to defend it through an application process, and that might make you feel quite defensive, but don't be scared to let yourself question it and change how now you're on the PhD track. You're not beholden to the application or project description as it stands. So I had a really good supervisory team early on ask me the questions and ask me to think about how to develop it. And yeah, it's about you and your learning journey. So that's the last thing. And thank you for listening. I know I talked a bit fast, so if anyone's got questions, just let me know. And I'm always open to a coffee or a chat. So please do reach out, and you can follow me on Twitter as well if you want. Thank you.